This is HOA Justice Stories. Let me set the scene in one breath. I am a court runner in Fairbanks, Alaska. I file documents, and I know deadlines. I know what happens when paperwork goes missing, and I know who gets stuck holding the bag when enforcement goes sideways. So when I looked out my kitchen window at 6:30 in the morning and saw a tow truck backing into the guest parking row, with its amber lights strobing across the wet pavement, I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I knew it was going to cost me if I did not move fast. I grabbed my keys and my phone and I sprinted outside in my socks because my work boots were still by the door. The lot was silent except for the diesel rumble and the hiss of the hydraulic lift cycling. The driver was already out of the cab, crouched at the front of my car with a tow strap in his hands, threading it under the bumper. He did not look up. He knew the drill. This was not his first rodeo, and it was not going to be his last unless someone made him stop. Rachel Mitchell was standing 10 feet behind him, with a clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. She was the gate access administrator for Hidden Creek Reserve Association, which meant she controlled the entry codes, the guest pass system, the vendor access logs, and apparently the tow vendor speed dial. She saw me coming and her mouth curled into a smile that had nothing to do with customer service. "You cannot park here," she said. "That is my car," I said. "I live here." "Residents cannot use guest spots," she said. "The rules are clear. This spot is reserved for visitors only." "I am hosting family this weekend," I said. "My driveway is full. I needed overflow parking for one night and the lot was empty when I pulled in last night." "Then you should have requested a temporary permit," she said. "You did not request one. You did not notify the office. You just parked here and assumed the rules do not apply to you." The driver stood up and walked back to the cab. He was not interested in the conversation. He had a work order and a fee schedule, and that was all he needed. Rachel tilted her head and adjusted the clipboard so I could see the colored tabs sticking out from the edges. Each tab had a handwritten note, but the ink was too small to read from where I stood. "I do not need your explanation, I need your payment," she said. "The tow fee is $275. The administrative processing fee is $50. The guest spot violation fine is $100. If you want to avoid the tow, you can pay the fine right now and move the car within 10 minutes. If you do not, the car goes to the yard and you pay the tow fee on top of the fine." I pulled out my phone and opened the HOA Covenant PDF I kept saved in my files. I scrolled to the parking section and held it up so she could see the screen. It says here that residents may use guest parking on a temporary basis if no guest spaces are available in their assigned area, and if they notify management within 24 hours, I said. I sent an email to the office last night at 11:42. I have the receipt. She did not even glance at the phone. She tapped one of the colored tabs and flipped the clipboard around so I could see a printed page with a highlighted section. The text was too small, and the angle was wrong, but I could see the bold header at the top. "That was the old covenant," she said. "The board amended the parking rules in March. The new rules require pre-approval for any use of guest spaces by residents. No exceptions. No retroactive notice. If you did not get approval before you parked, the space is considered occupied illegally and subject to immediate enforcement." "I have done this before and people fold every time," she said. The hydraulic lift whined and the front of my car started to rise. The driver was hooking the chains to the frame. I looked at Rachel and I looked at the truck and I made a decision. I was not going to pay her fake fine and I was not going to let her tow my car without a fight. But I was also not going to argue on the pavement at dawn with a woman who had already decided I was guilty. I needed to move the fight somewhere I could control the record. "Fine," I said. "Tow it. I will see you at the next board meeting." She blinked. That was not the reaction she expected. people were supposed to panic or yell or pull out their wallets. I turned and walked back toward my unit. Behind me, I heard the lift lock into place and the truck start to roll. Rachel called after me. "You will still owe the fee," she said, "plus storage. Every day you wait costs you another $35. I did not turn around. I went inside and I pulled up the management company portal on my laptop. The site was down. The login page threw an error and the support number went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 times and got the same result. The portal had been glitchy for weeks, but today it was completely dead, and I needed to deliver paper proof in person if I was going to fight this before the fees stacked up into a lien. I grabbed my work bag and I pulled out the folder where I kept copies of every HOA notice, every email, every covenant revision, and every fee schedule change. I had been tracking the parking enforcement pattern for 3 months because Rachel had been targeting certain homes with guest violations while ignoring others. My neighbor 2 doors down had a guest van parked in a fire lane for 4 days straight, and Rachel walked past it every morning without a word. Another neighbor had friends park in guest spots every weekend and never got a violation. But my car sat in a guest spot for 6 hours overnight and I got the tow truck treatment. I had noticed the pattern and I had started building a file. I had certified mail receipts for every notice I sent to the office. I had time-stamped photos of the unequal enforcement. I had a clean paper trail and I was going to use it. But first I needed to understand what Rachel was actually claiming, and whether the board had really amended the rules, or if she was just making it up. I drove to the HOA management office in my work truck. The office was in a strip mall on the south side of town, wedged between a dental clinic and a tax prep service. The parking lot was empty except for one sedan with a Hidden Creek Reserve bumper sticker. I went inside, and the receptionist told me the property manager was not available until after 10. I said I would wait. She said I could leave a message. I said I needed to file a formal complaint, and I needed a copy of the March parking amendment Rachel Mitchell had cited that morning. The receptionist looked uncomfortable. She clicked through a couple screens on her computer, and then she printed a single page and handed it to me. It was a memo from the board dated March 15th. The memo announced a new parking enforcement policy that required residents to obtain pre-approval for any use of guest parking spaces. The memo said the policy was effective immediately and that violations would be subject to fines and towing. I read it twice. The memo did not reference the covenant. It did not cite a specific section or amendment number. It did not include a vote record or signature from the board president. It was just a memo on Hidden Creek Reserve letterhead, with a paragraph of new rules and a line at the bottom that said enforcement would be handled by the gate access administrator. Did the board vote on this? I asked. The receptionist shrugged. I just print what they send me, she said. I took a photo of the memo with my phone and I asked for a copy of the meeting minutes from March. She said those were not public until they were approved at the next meeting. I said the next meeting was not for 2 more weeks and I needed the minutes now because I was disputing a fine. She said she could not help me. I asked to speak to the property manager. She said he was in a meeting. I said I would wait. I sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes. The property manager never came out. The receptionist eventually told me he had left through the back door and would not be available until Monday. It was Friday. I had until Monday to respond to the violation or the fine would automatically process and go on my account. Rachel had timed this perfectly. She knew the portal was down. She knew the manager was unavailable. She knew I would have to scramble, and she was counting on me to either pay the fine or miss the deadline. I left the office, and I called my lawyer. I did not have an HOA lawyer on retainer, but I had a friend from law school who handled real estate disputes. I explained the situation and he told me to file a written demand for the meeting minutes, the amendment vote record, and a breakdown of the fees. He said if the board had amended the parking rules without a proper vote, the amendment was not enforceable. He said if Rachel was inventing fees that were not in the covenant, that was a breach of fiduciary duty and I could demand a refund and possibly damages. He also told me to check the tow vendor contract. He said most HOA tow contracts require the HOA to verify that a violation occurred before authorizing a tow. If Rachel had called the tow truck without verifying my email or checking the covenant, the HOA could be liable for an improper tow, and I could demand they cover the tow fee and any storage charges. I hung up and I drove to the tow yard. The yard was on the north side of town, behind a chain-link fence with a rolling gate that rattled every time the wind hit it. The gate was closed, but I could see my car parked in the second row, still hooked to the flatbed. I walked up to the gate, and a guy in a stained jacket came out of the office trailer. "You here for the blue sedan?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. $275 for the tow, he said. $35 a day storage starting tomorrow. You want to pay now, or you want to wait? I want a copy of the authorization, I said. He squinted at me. What? The authorization from the HOA, I said. I want a copy of the signed tow authorization that shows who called you and what violation you were enforcing. We do not give those out, he said. You have to, I said. This is a private property tow. You are required by state law to provide the vehicle owner with a copy of the authorization on request. If you do not have one, the tow is illegal and I am not paying. He disappeared into the trailer and came back 2 minutes later with a single page. It was a tow authorization form with Hidden Creek Reserve Association printed at the top. The form had a handwritten note that said guest spot violation and a signature at the bottom. The signature was scribbled and I could not read it, but I took a photo of the form with my phone before I handed it back. I am not paying until the HOA confirms the violation, I said. If they cannot provide documentation, you need to release the car. The guy laughed. Good luck with that, he said. We get paid either way. If the HOA does not pay, you do. If you do not pay, we sell the car. That is how it works. I walked back to my truck and I called Rachel Mitchell. She answered on the second ring. What? She said. I need a copy of the signed tow authorization, I said. The yard said you called the tow. I want to see the paperwork that shows you verified the violation before you authorized the tow. I do not need to verify anything, she said. I saw your car in the guest spot. That is a violation. I called the vendor. That is my job. Your job is to enforce the covenant, I said. The covenant says residents can use guest parking temporarily with notice. I sent notice. You ignored it. You towed my car without checking the covenant, and now you are trying to charge me fake fees that are not in the rules. The fees are in the new policy, she said. I already showed you the memo. If you do not like the policy, you can bring it up at the meeting, but you still owe the fees. I let the meeting move on, because my move was not a speech, it was a document. She paused. What are you talking about? She asked. I will see you at the meeting, I said, and I hung up. I spent the rest of Friday pulling documents. I printed every email I had sent to the management office. I printed the covenant section on parking. I printed the memo Rachel had cited. I printed the tow authorization form. I printed the fee schedule from the HOA website. I highlighted every contradiction and I flagged every procedural error. The memo was not an amendment. The board had not voted. The fees were not in the covenant. Rachel had called the tow without verification. The entire enforcement action was a fabrication, and I was going to prove it. Saturday morning I got a letter in my mailbox. It was a notice from Hidden Creek Reserve Association on official letterhead. The notice said that my guests would be cited. clamped, or towed if they parked in any common area space again. The notice said that repeated violations would result in fines up to $500 per incident and possible legal action. The notice was signed by Rachel Mitchell, Gate Access Administrator, and it had a red stamp at the bottom that said "Final Warning" in bold letters. I took a photo of the notice and I added it to the file. Rachel was escalating. She was trying to intimidate me into paying and dropping the complaint, but she was also creating more evidence. Every letter she sent, every threat she made, every fee she invented, it all went into the file. And the file was getting thick. Sunday night, I got a call from a neighbor who lived 3 units down from me. She said she had been at the clubhouse earlier that day, and she overheard Rachel talking to another board member about the parking enforcement. She said Rachel had told the board member that she was planning to bring a motion to the next meeting to suspend my access to guest parking entirely until I paid the outstanding fines. She said Rachel had also mentioned that she was working with the tow vendor to install tire clamps in the guest lot, so that any unauthorized vehicle could be immobilized on site without waiting for a tow truck. I thanked my neighbor and I added her name to my witness list. I also checked the HOA website and found the agenda for the next board meeting. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday night at 7. The agenda listed 14 items, but there was no mention of a parking enforcement motion. That meant Rachel was planning to add it as new business at the end of the meeting, when most of the homeowners had already left, and the board could vote without scrutiny. Monday morning, the management portal was still down. I drove back to the office and I hand-delivered a formal demand letter. The letter requested copies of the March meeting minutes, the parking amendment vote record, the fee breakdown, and the tow vendor contract. The letter also demanded that the HOA immediately release my car from the tow yard and refund any fees charged. The letter said that if the HOA failed to comply within 48 hours, I would file a complaint with the State Attorney General and pursue damages for improper towing and harassment. The receptionist accepted the letter and time-stamped it. She said the property manager would respond within 5 business days. I said that was not acceptable. I said the meeting was tomorrow night and I needed the documents before the meeting. She said she could not help me. I said I would be at the meeting and I would be bringing my own documents. Tuesday afternoon, I picked up my car from the tow yard. I paid the $275 tow fee with a credit card and I got a receipt. The receipt had the tow yard name, the date, the time, the fee, and a reference number. I took a photo of the receipt and I added it to the file. I also noticed that the tow yard kept mailing me copies of the same receipt every few days, as if they wanted to make sure I did not forget I had paid. The redundancy was strange, but I kept every copy because each one was another piece of evidence that the tow had happened and the fee had been charged. I drove home and I changed into clean clothes. I grabbed the file folder and I headed to the clubhouse. The meeting was supposed to start at 7, but people were already gathering in the lobby by 6:30. I recognized a few faces from the neighborhood, but most of the crowd was older retirees who came to every meeting and voted however the board told them to vote. Rachel was standing near the front of the room with her clipboard. She saw me walk in and her expression tightened. The meeting started late. The board president spent 15 minutes on administrative updates and budget line items. Nobody asked questions. The treasurer gave a report on reserve funds and maintenance contracts. Nobody asked questions. The architectural committee gave a report on fence approvals and exterior paint violations. Nobody asked questions. By the time the board reached new business, it was almost 9 and half the room had cleared out. Rachel stood up and she asked the board for permission to address a parking enforcement issue. The board president nodded, and Rachel walked to the front of the room. She did not look at me. She opened her clipboard and she started reading from a prepared statement. She said that over the past 6 months there had been a significant increase in unauthorized use of guest parking by residents. She said that the violations were creating congestion and safety concerns. She said that the board had implemented a new policy in March to address the problem, but that some residents were refusing to comply. She said that enforcement was necessary to protect the community, and that the board needed to take stronger action. Then she said my name. She said that I had parked in a guest spot without authorization, and that I had refused to pay the fine. She said that I had filed a frivolous complaint with the management office, and that I was wasting the board's time and the association's resources. She said that I was hosting large family gatherings that created noise and parking overflow, and that my behavior was a nuisance to the neighborhood. She said that the board should suspend my guest parking privileges until I paid the outstanding fines and agreed to comply with the new policy. I raised my hand. The board president looked at Rachel and then looked at me. "Do you have something to add?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I would like to respond to the allegations and I would like to submit evidence for the record." The board president sighed. "Fine," he said. "You have 3 minutes." I stood up and I walked to the front of the room. I opened the file folder and I pulled out the first document. It was the covenant section on parking. I held it up so the board could see it. "The covenant says residents may use guest parking temporarily with notice," I said. "I sent notice. I have the email receipt. I followed the rules." Miss Mitchell ignored the notice and she called a tow truck without verifying the violation. That is improper enforcement. Rachel started to interrupt, but the board president waved her off. "Go on," he said. I pulled out the second document. It was the memo Rachel had cited. I held it up. "Miss Mitchell claims the board amended the parking rules in March," I said. "But this memo is not an amendment. It does not reference the covenant. It does not include a vote record. It does not have a signature from the board president. It is just a memo from Miss Mitchell announcing a new policy. The board did not vote on this policy. It is not enforceable." The board president looked at Rachel. "Is that true?" he asked. Rachel flushed. "The policy was approved by the compliance committee," she said. "It does not require a full board vote." "The covenant says rule changes require a board vote," I said. "The compliance committee does not have authority to amend the parking rules. This policy is invalid." The board president shuffled some papers. He looked at the treasurer. "Did we vote on this?" he asked. The treasurer shook his head. "I do not recall a vote," he said. Rachel slammed her clipboard on the table. "This is ridiculous," she said. "He is trying to distract from the real issue. He violated the parking rules. He refused to pay the fine. He is using technicalities to avoid responsibility." "I am using the covenant," I said. "The covenant is not a technicality. It is the governing document. If you want to enforce rules, you have to follow the covenant. You cannot make up fees and you cannot invent policies without a vote." I pulled out the third document. It was the tow authorization form I had photographed at the yard. I held it up. "Miss Mitchell called the tow truck without verifying my notice," I said. "The tow vendor has a signed authorization form that shows she called the tow before she checked the records. That is a violation of the tow vendor contract, and it is improper enforcement. The HOA is liable for the tow fee, and I am demanding a refund." Rachel tried to grab the document, but I stepped back. The board president held up his hand. "Let me see that," he said. I handed him the photo. He studied it for a moment and then he passed it to the treasurer. The treasurer frowned. "This does not have a verification stamp," he said. "Our contract with the tow vendor requires verification before a tow is authorized. If Miss Mitchell called the tow without verification, that is a contract violation." Rachel opened her mouth and then closed it. She looked at the board president and then looked at me. Her face was red and her hands were shaking. "If you want to see how this plays out, hit that subscribe button because it gets so much better. I pulled out the fourth document. It was the fee schedule from the HOA website. I held it up. "The fees Miss Mitchell charged are not in the covenant," I said. "The covenant lists a $50 fine for parking violations. Miss Mitchell charged me $100 for the violation, $50 for administrative processing, and $275 for the tow." The administrative processing fee does not exist in the covenant. The tow fee is not an HOA charge. Miss Mitchell is inventing fees, and she is trying to collect money that the HOA is not authorized to charge. The board president looked at Rachel. "Where are these fees coming from?" he asked. "They are in the new policy," Rachel said. "The policy includes updated fee schedules." "The policy is not valid," I said. "The board did not vote on it. The fees are not enforceable." The room was silent. The board president looked at the treasurer, and the treasurer shrugged. Rachel stood there with her clipboard pressed against her chest and her mouth set in a thin line. "I have one more document," I said. I pulled out the fifth document. It was a printout from the management company portal showing a breakdown of fees charged to my account. The printout listed 3 separate line items that were labeled legal consultation fees. Each line item was for $250. The dates on the line items corresponded to emails I had sent to the management office asking for copies of the covenant and meeting minutes. "These are bogus legal fees," I said. "The management company charged me $750 for legal consultation fees that I never requested, and I never received. The fees were added to my account without authorization. I contacted the management company and they said the fees were requested by Miss Mitchell as part of the enforcement process. But the covenant does not allow the HOA to charge legal fees to a homeowner without a hearing and a finding of liability. These fees are fraudulent." The board president stood up. He took the document from my hand and he read it slowly. Then he looked at Rachel. "Did you authorize these fees?" he asked. Rachel did not answer. She looked at the floor. The board president handed the document to the treasurer. "This is a serious problem," he said. "If these fees were added without authorization, we need to investigate, and we need to refund them immediately." The treasurer nodded. "I will contact the management company tomorrow," he said. I forced Rachel to answer a yes or no question, then dropped the document that contradicts her. "Did you tell the management company to add legal fees to my account?" I asked. Rachel looked up. Her eyes were wet and her voice was shaking. "I was following procedure," she said. "The fees are standard for enforcement cases." "Answer the question," I said. "Did you tell them to add the fees or not?" "Yes," she said. I pulled out the final document. It was a management company invoice trail showing the exact charges Rachel had authorized. The trail showed that Rachel had requested the legal fees 3 separate times, each time for a different enforcement action, and each time without notifying the homeowner or obtaining board approval. The trail also showed that the legal fees were being split between the management company and Rachel as part of a referral incentive program. The board president read the invoice trail. His face went pale. He looked at Rachel, and then he looked at the rest of the board. "This is embezzlement," he said. Rachel grabbed her clipboard and she turned to leave. The board president called after her, but she ignored him. She walked out of the meeting room and slammed the door behind her. The room erupted. Homeowners were shouting. The board was arguing. The treasurer was on his phone calling the management company. I stood at the front of the room with the file folder in my hand, and I waited. The board president banged his gavel 3 times. The room quieted down. "We are going to investigate this," he said. "We are going to contact the management company, and we are going to demand a full audit of all fees charged under Miss Mitchell's authority. If these fees were unauthorized, we will refund them. If Miss Mitchell abused her position, we will take appropriate action. This meeting is adjourned. People started filing out. A few homeowners came up to me and thanked me for bringing the evidence. One woman said she had been charged bogus fees too, and she wanted to know how to file a complaint. I gave her my lawyer's number. Another man said he had been fighting with Rachel over guest parking for months, and he was glad someone finally stood up to her. I walked out to the parking lot and I saw Rachel standing next to her car. She was on her phone yelling at someone. I walked past her and got into my truck. She hung up and she walked over to my window. I rolled it down. "You think you won," she said. "You did not win anything. The board is not going to do anything. They never do. I will be back at my desk next week and you will still owe the fees." I looked at her and I smiled. "Check your email," I said. "What?" she asked. "I sent a copy of the invoice trail to the State Attorney General this afternoon," I said. "I also sent a copy to the management company's corporate office. And I sent a copy to every homeowner in the association using the directory from the clubhouse bulletin board. You are not going to be at your desk next week. You are going to be answering questions from investigators." Her face went white. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I rolled up the window and I drove home. Wednesday morning, I got a call from the board president. He said the management company had suspended Rachel pending an investigation. He said the board had voted to refund all unauthorized fees charged to homeowners over the past year. He said the board was also terminating the contract with the tow vendor and implementing a new parking enforcement policy that required board approval before any vehicle could be towed. He said the new policy would be presented at the next meeting for a full membership vote. He also said that the board had reviewed my complaint and determined that my parking violation was not valid. He said the fine would be removed from my account and the tow fee would be refunded. He said the board was sorry for the inconvenience and they appreciated my diligence in bringing the fee abuse to their attention. I thanked him and I hung up. Then I called the tow yard and told them to stop mailing me receipts because I was getting a refund. The guy on the phone laughed and said good luck getting money back from an HOA. I told him the board had already voted and the check was being processed. He stopped laughing. Thursday afternoon, I got a package in the mail. It was from the management company. Inside was a check for $750 and a letter of apology. The letter said the legal fees had been charged in error, and the management company was reviewing its procedures to prevent similar errors in the future. The letter also said that Rachel Mitchell's employment had been terminated, and she would no longer be involved in any HOA enforcement actions. Friday morning, I was watering my lawn when my neighbor walked over. He said he had heard about the meeting and he wanted to know if it was true that Rachel had been stealing from homeowners. I told him the investigation was still ongoing, but the evidence was clear. He shook his head and said he always knew something was off about her, but he never had proof. He also said that a city inspector had been by the neighborhood earlier that week and had confirmed that the guest parking rules Rachel had been enforcing were not actually within the HOA's authority to regulate, because the guest lot was technically on a city easement and subject to city parking laws, not HOA rules. That detail hit me like a truck. If the guest lot was on a city easement, then the HOA had no enforcement authority at all. Every fine, every tow, every threat Rachel had made was not just improper, it was completely invalid. I called my lawyer and told him. He said that changed everything. He said I could file a claim against the HOA for wrongful enforcement and possibly recover damages for harassment and emotional distress. He also said that if other homeowners had been targeted the same way, we could file a class action. I thought about it for a day and then I decided I did not want to drag it out. I had my refund. Rachel was gone. The board had fixed the policy. I had won. I did not need to punish the HOA or bankrupt the association. I just wanted the harassment to stop, and I wanted the rules to be fair. The board had promised both, and I was going to hold them to it. The next board meeting was 2 weeks later. The parking enforcement policy was on the agenda. The board presented the new policy, and it included everything my lawyer had recommended. Residents could use guest parking temporarily with notice. Violations required verification before enforcement. TOWs required board approval. Fees had to match the covenant. The policy also included a provision that any homeowner who had been charged invalid fees in the past could file for a refund, and the board would review the claim within 30 days. The membership voted, and the policy passed unanimously. After the meeting, the board president pulled me aside and asked if I would be willing to serve on the compliance committee. He said the board needed someone who understood the covenant and who was not afraid to push back on bad enforcement. I told him I would think about it. I drove home and I parked in my driveway. My family was coming in for the weekend, and I had plenty of space for everyone. No tow trucks, no clipboards, no threats. Just a quiet neighborhood and a fair set of rules. Saturday morning, I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee when Rachel drove past. She slowed down and stared at me, but she did not stop. She looked smaller somehow, like the clipboard and the badge clip and the authority had been holding her up, and now that they were gone, she was just a middle-aged woman in a windbreaker, driving through a neighborhood that did not want her anymore. I watched her turn the corner and disappear, and I went back to my coffee. The final piece of the story came a month later. The state attorney general's office sent me a letter. The letter said they had completed their investigation into the Hidden Creek Reserve Association and the management company. The investigation had found evidence of systematic fee abuse targeting multiple homeowners. The management company had agreed to a settlement that included refunds for all affected homeowners and new oversight procedures to prevent future abuse. The letter also said that the HOA minutes had been amended to record the reversal of all invalid fines, and the specific reason for the reversal was Rachel's selective enforcement and unauthorized fee charges. That was it. The minutes recorded the reversal and the reason. Karen's own selective enforcement got documented in the minutes. A city inspector confirming what the HOA cannot enforce had blown the entire scheme wide open. And Karen's printed packet went airborne in a gust of wind at the worst possible moment, which had happened during one of her earlier enforcement attempts when she was trying to cite another neighbor, and a sudden breeze scattered her citations all over the parking lot, forcing her to chase them down while the neighbor drove away. I kept the tow yard receipt. It still shows up in my files every time I sort through my HOA folder. It is a reminder that you can fight back, and you can win if you know the rules, and you are willing to do the work. Rachel thought she could bully me into paying fake fees and folding like everyone else. She thought her clipboard and her badge clip and her memorized catchphrase made her untouchable. But the covenant is stronger than a clipboard, and the truth is stronger than a lie, and when you have both on your side, the Karens lose every time. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you being here.